Hello, everyone, and welcome to Catchpoint's third live Ask Me Anything session. Specifically, we're focused today on outages and responding to tech's worst nightmare, presented in partnership with O'Reilly Media. Before we get started, as always, there's a few housekeeping notes. The first things first, all attendees' lines are muted. The presentation is being recorded and will be sent out over the next couple of days. And then feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom and ask questions to our panelists. At times, panelists might be looking at some of the questions there and may respond, or if we have time, we'll make sure we tag those on onto the end. As always, I want to get started and welcoming and greeting our esteemed panelists today. So first we have Jason Han. Jason is the DevOps Evangelist at VictorOps. Do you want to say hello real quick, Jason?
Hey, everybody. It's good to be here. Looking forward to this. Should be fun.
Welcome. Thank you, Jason. So Jason, he's the author of O'Reilly book, ChatOps, Managing Operations from Group Chat, as well as ChatOps for Dummies, a core organizer for DevOps Days in the Rockies, as well as a host of many DevOps and IT management meetups and events around the country. Jason enjoys speaking on topics such as modern incident management, learning from failure, and of course, ChatOps. So thanks for joining us, Jason.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is going to be fun. I've gotten to know J. Paul Reed really well and Heather, over the past year or so, and I think we got an excellent panel to discuss this stuff about outages. So looking forward to it.
Thank you. Next up, we have Heather Mickman, who is the Senior Director of Platform Engineering at Target. Say hello, Heather.
Hello. Oh, hey, happy to be here today.
Thank you so much for your time. So Heather is currently working on building the platforms used by software engineers at Target. Heather has 20 plus years of experience in IT, from doing consulting at Fortune 500 companies on supply chain approach, implementing warehouse automation technologies, running large ops organizations, and building enterprise API programs. She has a passion for technology, building high-performing teams, driving a culture of innovation, and having fun along the way. Awesome. Very excited to have you here today, Heather. Thank you. And last but not least, we have the great J. Paul Reed. J. Paul is the founder of Release Engineering Approaches, a consultancy incorporating a host of tools and techniques to help organizations simply ship every time. Do you want to say hello real quick, Paul?
Hey, everybody. It's great to be here with Jason and Heather talking about outages, our favorite subject.
Perfect. So Paul, he worked across a number of industries, from financial services to cloud-based infrastructures, with teams from as little as 2 to 2,000 on everything from tooling, operational analysis and improvement, and team culture transformation to business value optimization. He speaks internationally on release engineering, DevOps, operational complexity, and human factors, and is currently a Master's of Science candidate in Human Factors and System Safety at Lund University. Awesome. Well, yeah. We have a great set of panelists, and we are, without further ado, we're probably going to go right to the Q&A part, so we have as much time as possible. These questions directly come from our community site, so they are literally the questions that you wanted to ask, and we are going to be asking our panelists today. My name is Andrew Smirnov. I am going to be your moderator, and without further ado, let's go and get things started. So our first question today is going to be for Jason. So Jason, how much does the incident management process change with the new way of working? So now as software development is changing to use Agile, Lean, and how does that change the whole incident process?
Sure. Well, I think, first of all, DevOps has just really been an evolution of the things that we've learned and taken from Agile and Lean, and we're starting to just combine a lot of those ideas. And for me, the ones that are most obvious is that teams are becoming a lot more, they don't necessarily follow a rigid plan. They try to be a little bit more responsive, which comes from Agile. I think making work visible, which is definitely a Lean concept, is something that we see a lot more, especially with regards to incident response. A lot of teams are moving their conversations and just the actions that they're doing. They're moving that into chat so that there's just sort of a better awareness about what's going on. And that's definitely taken straight from, the concepts of Lean in terms of making work visible. And then also the ideas of collaborating and being able to swarm to problems and get a lot of people, get a lot of eyeballs on something. I think that's where we start to see these high-performing cross-functional teams that we hear so much about. They are very good at swarming to a problem, and because so many more people are getting involved with this, you start to see just a lot of different subject matter experts bring in their own expertise. That starts to help build empathy among your teams, and we're seeing developers start to be part of the on-call rotation. So I think there's a lot of different areas between Agile, Lean, and DevOps. But for me, the biggest one is just being more flexible and responsive, showing your work and what you're doing, and then being a lot more collaborative.
Awesome, awesome. And I know, J. Paul, you can speak to that as well. Did you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so the way I see it, and I agree with everything Jason said, but one of the things that I really see is, we talk a lot about the 3 ways of DevOps. So systems thinking, feedback loops, and then experimentation and learning. And really kind of the first 2 are where you see sort of incident management and incident response coming into how DevOps is kind of changing how we do that. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the model. There's an incident, and then there's like an incident management team in the NOC, right, that notices it and they deal with it. And then when they're done with that incident, it just kind of gets dropped on the floor, right? There's oftentimes not any post-mortem or retrospective or any kind of learning from it, or even if there is, maybe the quality of that's not great, it's finger pointing, and then that's never fed back into any sort of learning for the system or the organization. So I think the 2 big changes that I see, again, to Jason's point, is you see everyone in that value stream getting involved. So developers, operations, QA. So really it is sort of a value stream view when you look at organizations that are really doing incident management well. It's that value stream view. And then also, it's not just about the incident anymore. We like to talk about there's an incident life cycle now. So you're not just managing the incident, you're kind of managing the life cycle of a single incident through the resolution, but through the retrospective and the learning, and then how do you sustainably feed that back into the system? And those are all big core DevOps concepts. And I think that because DevOps has become so popular, people are applying it to incident management, and it's really taking traction there.
Excellent. Heather, did you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with everything, that Jason and J. Paul said, and even to expand on, I think for me, the biggest change has been in that feedback loop. It's so much tighter now than it was years ago. And as I was thinking about today, I was recalling probably one of the toughest jobs I've ever had in my career many years ago. And it was in a support break fix type organization. And so my job every single day, 24/7 all year round was dealing with production and when production was broken. And we were completely siloed from our development teams. And so then of course, if we would say hey, we've got all these problems continuing to happen, we never ever were able to get that into a backlog of a dev team, because those teams were very much project focused. They were incented to get new features out really quickly, but not necessarily think about what's this going to look like once it's in production. I even had at one point a dev team that I was working with come to my desk one day and say, will you please sign this document that says your team will take transition of this new app that we're building within 30 days. I asked where I could sign that in blood, and then and then asked, it's listen, I'll take transition of anything if you show me that it's stable, and that as I have feedback into your development cycle, you'll actually listen to me and not just push me away. So anyways, that long story or long answer, I guess, that feedback loop is so much tighter than it was.
And I'd like to add to that. I think just speaking to the feedback loops, that the feedback loop conversation is a big part of the DevOps stuff, and Agile and Lean as well. And I think as a result of that, just the ideas of monitoring and alerting have become much more of a first-class citizen. Where used to in the past, it was just something you bolted on at the end. Okay, let's throw in some monitoring and keep an eye on this. Let's make sure somebody is set up on an on-call rotation and will get paged if something breaks. But now it's being thought of more holistically and being kind of, put into the process much earlier in the phase. And then I think as a result, people are just able to shorten those feedback loops. They know what's going on a lot quicker. They can get some people reacting to problems and addressing problems a lot quicker. And you know, I have to say, you know, personally, I see that all the time at just different conferences we go through, how people are starting to put much more of an emphasis on the importance of monitoring and alerting. And, you know, of course, I work at VictorOps, which is an alerting tool, and we see that all the time. And that's the feedback we get, is that companies now are realizing, you know, problems are going to happen. We need to know about this a lot quicker and be able to respond to it a lot quicker. So I think Agile, Lean, DevOps has really helped bring a sort of surface the importance of monitoring and alerting much earlier in the life cycle.
Perfect. And I think that's a good transition to our next question. And this one kind of goes back to Heather to kick things off and maybe, you know, hear some additional thoughts. But I guess, Heather, is there, and what is there a single step process technology that will move you furthest on the road to incident management maturity? I know Jason kind of talked about monitoring and alerting. What are the first things we should implement in an organization for better outage response, assuming we already have basics like monitoring and alerting?
Right. Well, yeah, of course, monitoring and alerting. But then I would say, right, like, and Jason's already used the word, it's just ChatOps, right? Like, that has been so huge and kind of game changing for us at Target, with how, you know, just like the idea of persistent chat, making our work visible when we are working on and troubleshooting, you know, some kind of issue in production, just being able to see what everyone is doing at the same time. Like, if I can only call out one thing, I think that's what I would say. If I can call it a second thing, I think also just being able to have really like easily well-defined escalation policies. Like, if I care about production's my number one concern, right? And so being able to have that in place, I know kind of who's on point for what when we do have problems, because we all know we're going to run into problems. That's been great to have that just more transparent and easy to manage as well.
Got it. Jason, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not necessarily one specific step or process or technology. I think there's a lot of stuff. Every year, Puppet Labs puts out the State of DevOps report. And this year, it was wonderful to see, you know, they always include little snippets about the importance of MTTR, the mean time to repair, the mean time to recover. But as of this most recent report, they're actually tying some real numbers to the value of that. And you can see what the cost of downtime may be for your situation. And a lot of that has to do with how quickly are you able to recover from an issue. So I think, you know, the fact that people are starting to see the importance of reducing their MTTA and reducing their MTTR, you know, that's definitely helping them in a lot of ways, but also the teams or the companies who are starting to take much more of a focus on how do we learn and improve moving forward once something goes wrong. And so I think the post-incident analysis, whether you call that a learning review or a postmortem or an after-action report, I think all of us agree that's really just semantics, but this idea of doing something afterwards, I think really helps sort of get people prepared and more rehearsed for when things go wrong. And that's, I think, has helped out a lot of companies as well.
Excellent. So I guess that begs the question is you know, talking about prevention, right, and safeguarding from outages. And I think this is, looking at you here, J. Paul, is what are some ways that you can actually safeguard your systems from outages? Is it even possible to prevent outages 100% of the time? Is there a concept of close to 100% preventable?
Yeah, this is the $64,000 question, right? That everybody, you know, if you could answer what gets you to 100%, then I'd be, you know, a millionaire. And I was actually joking on Twitter about I'm going to drop the secrets on how to get 100% prevention on these things. So the answer is you know, maybe quite obviously no, you can never really get to 100%. But I think the difference is you know, if you look at the safety sciences and how they kind of model these things, the difference between sort of an incident and an accident is when a system goes across what they call the boundary of acceptable risk, right? So when it goes across that boundary, you have an accident that is customer facing, that people notice, an outage, whatever it might be, right? And the literature talks about what you really want to be training your team as part of that system and as someone who, you know, the group of people that operate that system. You want to get them really good at being able to detect when they're close to that boundary, right? When there's something that might be an incident but isn't quite yet an accident. Or sometimes the system can actually go across into accident territory. And if they're really, really good, they can pull the system back across the boundary and nobody will notice, right? So when we talk about organizations like Netflix, right, that you know, I'm trying to remember. I don't know if I've ever heard of people talking about Netflix being totally down. It's been a long time, right? And I think it's because Netflix has gotten really good at detecting things that are incidents before customers even notice, right? And they have all of these automatic failover kind of provisions on the engineering technology side to do that. But also their team built up a really good capacity for understanding when they're coming close to that boundary and then stopping the system from kind of just falling off the edge of that boundary. And so I think that's kind of the biggest way to really do that, is all of the methodologies that we're talking about getting the teams really good at kind of feeling out where that boundary is, where they don't feel good, where the system is, and then getting them good at recovering when it goes bad. If you get really good at that kind of dotted line boundary of an incident moves further away from the accident boundary. So you have more incidents, but again, customers don't notice. So they think you have, 99.9999% uptime.
Got it. Heather, Jason, anything to add?
Yeah, I got a few extra thoughts to that. I think, for one, I totally agree with Paul. Outages are not 100% preventable. I think we're starting to really wrap our head around why that is the case, that our systems that we build and maintain are very complicated or complex distributed systems, and there's just a lot of moving components, and there's a lot of unknowns that you really can't account for, and therefore you can't actually 100% prevent an outage. Although we're still, for many of us, we still have this mindset of challenge accepted. I will make my system invulnerable to all kinds of problems, and we set out with a lot of focus and a lot of energy to try to prevent things, and we spend a lot of time just trying to predict and prevent things rather than trying to get really good at responding to something when it goes wrong. So I totally agree with Paul that the ones that the teams and the organizations who've gotten really good at this, Netflix is a perfect example, they're less concerned with preventing something and more concerned with what does our team look like? How does our response look like? And how do we get really good at not only detecting when things are about to go south, but how are we really, really good at formulating a team together with all the information, all the context, and all the tools that they need so that they're empowered to fix things very quickly.
And just to that point, I would note that they architected for that behavior, and all of their development teams really architected. So it's the technology and the team part, which is really kind of critical for them.
Yeah, and the irony of the whole thing is that at the beginning of all this, when we sit down and we think, what is it we're trying to do? Well, we want to create a highly available system. They set out and try to prevent things from happening. But the ones that are actually building and maintaining these highly available systems are the ones who get really, really good at detecting it and responding to it really quickly, looking for areas to improve their systems and the responses to make things a little bit more or a lot more resilient. And then that resiliency is what ends up providing the high availability, more so than just hardening the systems from the get-go.
Excellent. And so I think you kind of touched on, the next question was what methods and practices, maybe you can speak a little bit, focus on the methods and practices. Which ones do you see as most valuable in preventing or limiting the impact of incidents? Is it just the development life cycle? Is it a specific methodology? Is there something that if a company is looking to kind of start transforming that they would be best starting at?
I mentioned earlier that a lot of organizations out there are starting to make it so that monitoring and alerting really is a first-class citizen, and they're starting to get that discussion going early on as they're architecting their systems, as they're sitting down with their developers. This is where the role of an SRE can be super useful. You sit somebody down who knows the infrastructure with the engineers, and you start to prepare for what it is that you're building in the long term. So I think that that's super important, that teams are now starting to leverage monitoring and metrics even in their development environments, because it helps the engineer understand that tool, helps the engineer develop for types of failures. But then there's other things that we've already sort of touched on with the idea of fault injection, chaos engineering, game days, the things that we hear a lot of stories about from Netflix and lots of others. I'm sure Target and lots of other companies do these things too. But when you start to use those types of sort of exercises, it opens up the door to all kinds of new areas of learning, which then helps you become a lot more, like I said, resilient, and it has a little less impact. And then you can start to look for areas where you can begin to enter in some automation and some self-healing too, because you've learned that under this circumstance, here's the action that we always take. So let's automate that. And so, you know, there's just a lot of stuff. I think really, for me, the one that sees the biggest impact is making monitoring and alerting a lot more important early on in the life cycle of developing. But then getting really rehearsed. If we start looking at our on-call response more as a pit stop in a race rather than you know, something that's a problem and we have to address randomly, we can get really good at just making this is just part of day-to-day business. We can go in and we can fix things as they go south rather than being more complete reactive to just chaos. We don't always know what to do under duress and under, you know, stress and different situations, but if we practice it all the time, we'll get really good at it. A lot like we were talking before the recording, Paul and I did a flight simulator today, and one of the main reasons why they do that is because they want to put these, you know, these engineers, these pilots, in all kinds of situations where they have to solve the problems under duress and without, you know, without hopefully losing any life and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a very similar idea when we can get into the practice of actually practicing response.
Absolutely, absolutely. J. Paul, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that I kind of look at when you're talking about kind of methods and practices to limit or you know, prevent sort of incidents or the impact of incidents, you can kind of bucket them into three categories, and I actually think all of them are important. And again, this kind of comes from the safety sciences. So one of the buckets is barriers, right? So defense in depth, sort of add more barriers to whatever process you have, add more protection to whatever process you're doing. And those are important because I think, especially with DevOps and continuous delivery, a lot of those things are very new. So our continuous delivery pipeline may actually have caused a problem, right? And that's kind of a simple, you know, fortify it, make it better. And maybe it's because it's a new technology, right? And so those are totally valid solutions. Well, the other bucket that you see is sort of decomposing systems, simplifying systems. We've got you know, a lot of complexity, and you can't remove it all, but you can certainly, if you've got a super complex monolith, I mean, this is where microservices comes from, right? Trying to decompose that, pull it apart. You know, in the Netflix model or in the cloud model, right, it's cattle, not pets. So that's a way to simplify things where you've got kind of herds of compute resources that can do things, as opposed to the one server that if it goes down, we're all kind of screwed. So that's kind of one bucket that you can kind of focus your solutions on. And then the third bucket actually falls into what they call, you know, high reliability theory or resilience engineering, which Jason referred to. And that's all the stuff we've been talking about. You know, chaos monkey, resilience engineering, incident life cycle stuff that we referred to before. So paying attention to that, really focusing on the feedback loops and focusing on learning and drills and crew formation and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's totally valid to have a solution in any of those buckets. The really good solutions actually have solutions at all of those buckets. I think where you find people responding to incidents and they don't get any benefit is they think to themselves, let's just put another barrier in. Let's put another defense in depth. And that doesn't really scale. And over time, it actually increases complexity. And it just doesn't really work in the systems. And we learned this in the safety sciences back in the 80s, 70s and 80s. So when we just think that's going to save us, that's where things become very problematic in terms of prevention or limiting the blast radius.
Excellent. Looks like we're going to be then on to the next question. So we've done all these things. We have a plan in place. We're working with the teams closely to keep an eye on things. We have some sort of monitoring in place, and this is kind of a broad question, but it's an interesting kind of it's a good starting point. So in the case of a massive outage, where do we start looking, and who do we turn to? And the answer here, of course, is depends, and what kind of instrumentation, what telemetry do you have in place, and what is the data saying. But in general, what are, you know, those that are responsible for shipping and building and deploying you know, supposed to do in those situations?
Right. Well, so I'll answer that question with a question. What do you do when your house has a massive fire? You call the fire department, right? And so my answer to that question, you're right, it's broad. It's going to be, architecture specific, company specific. But when there's a fire, we call the fire department. Why do we call the fire department? Because they're the professionals in dealing with that problem. And there's a great saying, the fire service is like, a fire is not an emergency to the fire department, right? So where that's applicable to us, the question was like, where do we start looking? Who do we turn to? If you don't have in your organization a crew that you can identify that drills this stuff, that is your fire department, for whether you have multiple fire departments because you have multiple services, or if you've got a monolith, there may be a couple big applications, maybe one fire department can cover all of those, right? If you don't have somebody playing that role, and I think Jason was kind of using the term SWAT teams, whatever you want to call that role, and that team should be a team, and it should have developers and ops folks and DB people and all of the groups involved in that system have those capabilities represented on that fire department, right? Just like they have hazmat, and in San Francisco we've got boat rescue, which is fun to see those guys tootling out on the bay, right? But we've got all of those things covered, and so that's the biggest thing. That is the biggest group that you turn to, and if you don't have that, it's kind of like living in a town without a fire department. It's like, maybe we need to vote and get a fire department, right? Because those are the people that are really going to be able to know what to look at. And even if they don't know what to look at, if they've been drilled, they'll know where to start. And I don't have to give you the answer that's specific to your application, because if you drill those people, they will know what in your application to be looking at and how to manage that specific massive outage. They will be the ones that will be able to show up on scene and do the firefighting that needs to be done.
And I'm going to add something else to comment on that, because again, this was something that Paul and I talked about earlier on our way back from the flight simulator, is that a lot of teams will get so focused on debugging and understanding what the problem is that things are actually getting worse. So I think sometimes we forget.
This is the famous, it started as a P4 incident and now we're fighting like a P2 incident, right? We've all seen those.
Yeah.
That's exactly what that is.
And that's normal for us to just want to understand what's causing the problem rather than just trying to restore and get things working. Then we can go back and sort of to just add a little bit more. To me, it's like you're not really going to, in the moment of a massive outage, you really just want to restore services. So you don't necessarily want to start looking in depth until things have been recovered. Then you get into what I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, is these exercises that we call postmortems and that kind of thing. And that's where you start digging in and understanding what was the response like, what did our metrics tell us, who was involved, what were their stories. So I think that actually helps out more than anything. But during the fight, Paul's exactly right. It's got to be more about that team that comes together and starts collaborating and sharing what they're seeing, sharing what they're doing. That's a big reason why that ChatOps stuff that Heather mentioned earlier has become so popular, is because that's one way that people are just solving problems very quickly, regardless of where they are and what time of day and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just add on really quick, because of course Jay, Paul, and Jason did a really nice job answering that. But one thing that we, just to tag on to restore service, get recovery in place quickly, anytime we have any kind of significant event happening, we make sure that we are very focused on what's the current impact, and we articulate what that impact is so that we can focus our efforts on making sure that we're restoring the service, kind of prioritizing, like, of course, right, for us at Target, prioritizing our guest experience in our systems. And so that as well helps us make sure that we're focused on the right thing from a recovering service perspective.
Excellent. Yeah, thinking about the users in mind and what their experience is like, absolutely. So I guess, so we talked a little bit about, some of the philosophies, talking about having a team that's the kind of the firefighters, right, in place. And, there's going to be all this preparation, and it's just a matter of time until there will be an incident. So shifting a little bit of gears, we talked about the teams that are responsible for triaging, that understand infrastructure and whatnot. Apart from like the proactive preparing, what can developers, software developers, do in the case of outages? How can they help in those scenarios? And I guess we'll start with Jay, Paul, and feel free, Heather and Jason, to chime in.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, again, the fact that we're asking this question is great, right? Because I think maybe before DevOps and right, I mean, 3, 4, 5 years ago, we would have said, well, that happens in the knock, and why would you involve developers at all? I think the best sort of firefighting teams that you see have developers on them that get sort of activated as part of that process. So they're a part of that process, and they get the same sort of incident management training. A lot of the suggestions that I have around that actually come from the incident management system, which is what the fire service, it's a standardized system the fire service across fire departments across the country use. And one of the biggest things that I see with developers getting involved is they'll show up on scene, and they will be what they call a reactor, right? So they'll kind of come into the chat, or they'll come on the phone bridge, and they'll be like, "Oh, the building's on fire," and it's like, "Yeah, we're aware the building's on fire," right? Or they'll try to be, sort of a hero, and they'll run into the burning building. And if you've got people trying to triage that problem, and maybe they already know something about the situation, you aren't helping at all, because if you get into trouble, they just have to go rescue you, right? Or you could run into an area that they're about to, to use the metaphor, douse water on, and now you're in the way, right? So one of the things it's really, I think, hard for a lot of people, but developers especially, to sort of understand that there's a process that has been tested with, people dying, and it's a lot of hard-learned lessons. And you really have to, if you've got a team that's been trained in that, respect. I think the biggest advice I would give is respect the people that are working the incident. Don't kind of join the bridge and then start kind of trampling over them, or doing things kind of in parallel that they aren't aware of, because that can just create a larger mess. And I know you may think that you're helping the incident. You're not really helping the incident, even if you're doing the right thing, and you're not letting the others know. Then they can't help you, or they can't clear the way to make sure that you have all the resources you might need, or that you can do it faster. Or they can give you some resources. So if you're, doing a rolling reboot, you could do that faster, whatever it is, right? So that's one of the real big bits of advice that I give developers is, if you're not part of that crew, and you haven't had any of that sort of incident management training, like, that's cool. It's great that you're getting on the bridge, like, the more the merrier, but really try to be a good participant in that firefighting exercise, and sort of respect the people they're leading that effort, and offer your assistance, but try not to get in the way when you're doing that. That's one of the biggest things I see. And by the way, like I said, we it is great when developers show up to help firefight. So I'm not saying don't show up. Please do. It's just help that effort, and contribute your knowledge to the rest of the group, as opposed to kind of going off on your own.
Excellent. Jason, Heather, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll add a few things. I mean, Paul summed it up pretty much exactly how I feel about all that. But for me, I think it's interesting to see how the conversation of putting developers on call has changed over time. I remember just a few years ago when I was at, I think it was my very first DevOps days, actually, someone from Chef had made a comment about, when you put developers on call, it's amazing how much the quality of their code improves. And that obviously has nothing to do with the outage itself and the response to the outage, but there's a shift in, sort of the culture of companies that starts to happen when developers do start to carry the pager and be responsible and start to own a lot more of what they're building all the way out into production. And I think that helps more holistically. They do have a sense of ownership. They do want to be part of the response when something goes wrong, because honestly, they probably have a little bit more intimate knowledge about things that may be part of what's going on, might be one of the contributing factors. And so, and especially if this outage happened right after a deployment, which is very, very common. So I think that bringing developers into the fold when it comes to the response is super important, but also making them, and this is going to be harder for different companies, but making them part of the on-call rotations, making them part of any kind of handoffs that you may have, just helping them understand a little bit more about what's going on with not only the code base, but the infrastructure. It builds empathy, and it starts to help out more on the front end of an outage rather than during the outage itself.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, Jason. I was going to share that, like I mentioned earlier, escalation policies, like absolutely the developers are part of being on call are part of owning what's happening within production. And absolutely, I would agree, like that helps drive up the quality of our systems and what we have running in production.
Awesome.
And I would just add one last thing, just as a note to that, because I would just kind of reiterate, like, so because I have the benefit of seeing like lots of different organizations, I will say this, and I'm sure Heather will probably agree. If your company or organization is having trouble convincing developers to kind of even be a part of this, they're behind the industry curve on that. Every incident response team that I see now, you know, whether or not they're kind of carrying the pager, that can be kind of a weird conversation. But in terms of these crews that we're talking about, the teams even that are just starting this have realized, hey, we got to do that just because it makes that whole firefighting process easier and better. And so as a trend, like this is the way it's moving, surprisingly so. I mean, with the number of organizations just kind of having, you know, that's not even a conversation anymore. It's like, yep, devs, they're a part of this now.
And I want to add one more thing, one more anecdote, because, you know, it's a story I have to share, especially because there's so many people probably watching and listening right now. I don't know if anybody's paying attention to the people that are watching, if the numbers just took a significant nosedive because of all the developers that are like noping out of this. But we, even at VictorOps, we've had a couple of engineers who just don't subscribe to that idea. They're developers. They feel like they're just purely developers. They show up to write code. They go home on the weekends. They're part of the deployment, maybe. But once it does, you know, proverbially get handed across the aisle or thrown over the wall or whatever, that's not their problem anymore. And they're not necessarily going to subscribe to the idea of being on call and owning and being part of the response team. And they're going to find work someplace, just not at some of these more modern thinking, forward-thinking companies. To Paul's point, this is just what, you know, is the new norm. But that doesn't mean that if you really don't want to be part of the on-call team and you don't want to have ownership in it, that you're not going to be able to be a developer. I just don't think you're going to be a developer at Target or Netflix or Amazon or any of these companies that we call unicorns, because they're the ones that are figuring out this is our competitive advantage.
Awesome. The next question, a little bit transitioning from that, we're actually going to ask a question from our Q&A chat panel in Zoom. And this one comes from Carlos, and he's asked, this goes to all of our panelists, have you guys seen companies doing game days or at your organizations, have you done anything like that to kind of simulate failures and train ops teams?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about what we do. So so at Target, we absolutely will practice different failure scenarios to make sure that we understand how to respond, how to recover, and how to react when different kind of failures start to happen. So I'd say, you know, we're probably in the early days of getting really good at it and having kind of a robust way to approach it, but it's definitely something that we're starting to do more and more, because I think it's really important. An important part of, Jason said it earlier, getting resilient systems, right? And making sure that we understand what to do and how to get better when we do have failures.
I'll go next. I mean, this is something certainly we try to do some version of game days within VictorOps. Obviously, if we're advocating for this type of behavior, it's something that we need to do. And honestly, we're supposed to stay up to tell you when you're down. So it is something that we definitely have some thoughts and feels about. One of the things that I think, because I think the question was more focused on whether or not this is something you do in a production environment or you do it in a testing environment. Certainly do it in a testing environment, but I think everyone would like to get to a maturity phase where you can start to do something within a production environment and get to the scenario like you are in Netflix. But I wouldn't make that sort of the ultimate goal. I wouldn't try to start there. You do want to start in some sort of test environment where you can go in and practice these game day simulations, and because it is really just about the response. And then maybe you'll get to a point where you're able to take off some microservice somewhere that is impacting a production environment and see how your team swarms around that. But I don't think anyone's going to advocate for doing that kind of thing in production right away.
Yeah, I just add to that. I mean, I see, it's really hard, right? Because we tell all these stories about Netflix and Amazon and how they do things, and there's the story about Jesse Robbins walking into, Amazon's data center and just yanking out cables. And I always tell people when I give talks, it's like, I am not suggesting you go back to your data center and just start yanking out cables. That's a recipe to get fired. So don't do that. But what you do see a lot of organizations doing is, it's a continuum. So they start with planned game days and they make game day one of their systems, a component, right? And what they do is they, kind of put everyone in a conference room and they may even red team it. So there may be two or three, I've seen this, 2 or 3 engineers that go into a different room and they have an actual script of what they're going to turn off. So they know kind of what the answer is to fix it. And then they put the rest of their team in a room with the ops team, with the database team, with whatever, group would firefight that. And they pick a time to do that that's low traffic or low, low cost for them if something goes really bad. And what's interesting is it's great empathy building. It's great team building. It's great practice for drilling this stuff. And you really, what I talk about as being an anti-pattern is when you don't dampen failure that you create, right? You don't put in that airbag. And so if you go and if you use this model, you actually have somebody inducing that failure that knows what they turned off, right? And in some cases, they may have a hot standby waiting that they didn't tell anyone about that they can shift traffic over to or whatever the architecture is, right? So that's a great way to start playing with game days. But that's where you start, where you schedule them. Everybody knows something's going to happen, right? And then maybe you move to, we are going to do something to the system today. We don't know what that is. And then you game that, and then you start moving to random chaos monkey type stuff. But that journey can take 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, Netflix, we all talk about how wonderful Netflix does with their chaos engineering, but it took them a long time to get that way, right? And so the reaction that I commonly see is this fear around doing that, and it's totally justified. But there are ways to start small, start kind of controlled burns, to use that kind of fire metaphor, that you can practice this stuff and not, feel kind of confident in getting your team together to sort of see what that's like.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much for answering that. That was from one of our live audience members. We're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about the upcoming holidays, whether that's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, the holiday shopping. Big important time of the year, especially for the retailers and e-commerce. So what can organizations and companies do to prepare for things like Black Friday, Cyber Monday? How do you prevent downtime and outages at one of the most critical times of the year? Any anecdotes or practices that teams should be thinking about specifically around big events? And maybe we'll start with Heather and go from there.
Sure. Yeah, I can start. Yeah, so we start thinking about kind of our peak season, Cyber Monday holiday. Well, it starts on Thanksgiving now, right? And we start thinking about that probably on Tuesday after Cyber Monday. And we spend, it's obviously really critical time for us as a retailer. And I wish that I was about to spew some magical thoughts on what it is that we can do to prepare for that time of year. But I'll be honest, and it's probably obvious, right? Good old fashioned, load testing, stress testing, identifying bottlenecks, things that have changed within our environment over the course of the year as teams are pushing out new features and functionality, and then resolving those bottlenecks. We spend a lot of time doing that leading up to next week. We just got done talking about game days, right? And I mentioned that we practice failure scenarios as well, right? So there's different things that are at the higher level of probability that could potentially happen. And so let's run through some of those, see what's going to happen to practice if that does happen, how will we recover and how will we respond? And then also, and again, this is just kind of back to good old fashioned, here's how you just make sure you have all the right people around if something does break, is during really critical times from a traffic perspective, is to have teams from different areas across the tech organization in a room together, and And I spend Thanksgiving with my coworkers and have done that for the last few years. It's actually kind of fun, like, because we get to see all of the hard work and like everything that has kind of led up to that over the course of the year. And then if something does kind of go sideways or we start to see some degraded experiences, we're able to pull everybody together really quickly because we're in the same room.
I'm gonna add. I've never been in charge of a large online e-commerce site like Heather has been. But one of the things that I think's very common you see with online retailers when you get into this part of the season is code freezes. Everybody does what they can, just like Heather said. Let's ramp up all resources. Let's make sure we've got good monitoring in place. We can scale as needed. We've got all hands on deck. Everybody's ready to go. I think that's all good. But then there's also the code freeze that a lot of companies can implement. And I think I don't know if we really want to dive into that here today. And it's definitely something that a lot of people have different thoughts on. But there's certain aspects to a code freeze that could be problematic for a truly continuous delivery shop, in that you're basically backing up a lot of work that then you're going to open the floodgate and have all these changes made to production. And it's going to be a little harder to understand what is being changed and what is happening to your production environment because you let them all kind of happen either at once or a little bit more quicker pace than usual. There's an advantage, I guess, to these continuous deployments is that we know they're smaller batches. We know what's going on. We can fix them, roll forward in most cases. But when we put a freeze on it, in some cases, I think that could cause more problems than good. But again, I'm not an online retailer, so maybe I don't really have the right sort of opinion on this. But I think it's a worthy conversation, and I don't know if we want to talk about that today or some other time. But it's just something I've heard out there that has definitely sparked some I don't know, some ideas in my head about how to advocate for that kind of thing. But something I just wanted to add.
Yeah, so I will react to that a little bit. So we at Target, we definitely have a code freeze, although we have changed what that looks like a lot in recent years. So if I were to rewind and go back 3 or 4 years ago, that code freeze would have started maybe sometime in September. It would have been really, really early on, and that was because the whole idea of CI/CD being able to push smaller changes more frequently just wasn't how we did our work. But as that has shifted over the last few years, it's probably this week where we have actually said, you know what, like, let's make sure that we really, really understand all and any changes that are going into production at this point are because we've identified a defect, we've identified, a bottleneck kind of at the 11th hour that we want to adjust before we get into next week, but we absolutely put freezes in place.
Excellent. So on the next topic a little bit, and some would say this is one of the most important pieces of the incident lifecycle is the post-mortems, right? So that's where you take the things that you've learned and then put it into action. How can we get better, right? So one of the things that one of our questions is, how do you sell the value of a well-written post-mortem to product teams? Sounds like possibly someone's having a hard time advocating for the value of the things learned through the post-mortem, and they're looking for, how do you sell the value of a well-written one? Maybe Heather, you can talk from some of the things you've seen and your experiences there.
Yeah, I mean, production's everybody's responsibility, and so if there was a product team ever that said I don't value a well-written post-mortem, I would question what's kind of happening on that team, because it's just core, kind of going back to some of the comments earlier, right? Like having a good feedback loop across product teams, that includes the devs on the team, and I think it's just a core theme of DevOps and how we do our work these days. Because we all learn something when there's some kind of, whether it's an outage or there's just some kind of degradation of service that shows up. And that at the end of the day is how we continue to get better, whether it's adding, additional kind of alerting and monitoring so that we know about problems ahead of time. If it's, yep, we actually just found a bug. Now we have some additional work in our backlog. Often a lot of what we'll find coming out of postmortems is what additional tests are we going to add so that, you know, the next time we put this type of change in that we, you know, we catch it before it even makes its way into production. I think other just, you know, I mean, there's so many value. We learn so much coming out of postmortems as well, right? Even if there's no kind of technical implementation coming out of postmortem, if it was simply like a communication breakdown or some kind of process breakdown, just again, important learnings. And I don't think there's a better way to learn about your systems, right? Than breaks, figure out what went wrong, why it went wrong, what assumptions went into, you know, that got us to the point where we saw that that breakage happen.
I'll tag on the back to that. I think first, any company who really sees itself as a learning organization isn't even going to ask the question of where's the value in a postmortem, because that's why they're there. They're there for learning and improving. They're not for uncovering some sort of quote unquote root cause or figuring out who's to blame and who do we let go and all those things. That's not what they're there for. They're there to just make things better over time. And I mentioned earlier in the State of DevOps report how, you know, sort of metrics and just numbers related to the mean time to repair, mean time to recover, and the actual cost of downtime, like those are quantifiable now. You can actually, within your own organization, start to understand what is our cost of downtime. And when we can either learn about, you know, more about what our infrastructure and our code's doing, what our response to problem looks like, and how do we get better at that, you can see that you start to reduce that mean time to repair, and you start to see that, you know, you start to reduce the cost as well. Like the impact to the company is less now that we're able to respond to these a lot more. And then for those, you know, this falls outside the product team, but somebody in the organization, the C-level, they care about brand awareness. And if you're doing postmortems and you're making public postmortems and you're being transparent about what's going on to your end users and your customer base, that is a positive gain to your brand as well. I mean, these days customers are way too savvy to put up with a customer, you know, or a service provider such as any of us being completely opaque about what's going on when there's a problem. Like our customers know that there's a problem. We have to be open and transparent, not only to let them know that we're on it and we're looking at it, but what are we going to do to try to make this have less of an impact moving forward? So I think, you know, there's lots of different ways where you can try to look for the value of a well-written postmortem, but it also kind of depends on who you're talking to as well.
So I'd add one thing, and I don't know if the person who asked this was sort of intending this. There's kind of an interesting kind of question or thing of interest in the way the question is phrased. The question is, how do you sell the value of a well-written postmortem? And the answer is a well-written postmortem is completely worthless. There's not actually a lot of value to sell there. Now, the process where you get people together and a well-run postmortem process that you then have items and remediation items and learnings that you shepherd through, you know, putting that on the backlog, getting those things addressed in a sustainable, sort of timely fashion, all of that, that's where the value is. And the thing about that is organizations that get good at that, you don't have to sell it. That kind of sells itself in terms of the you know, decreased MTTR and some of the metrics that the business tracks. And so, you know, I would point out what I see a lot of times is people think that the point of a retrospective is some big document that they can then hand the business that is, this is the narrative story of our 12-hour outage. And there's kind of no value in that if all of the AIs get dropped on the floor, you know, 2 sprints later, or we sort of ignore all those learnings or we don't follow up on them. So it was really, that's an interesting that the question was phrased that way. And it'd be interesting to talk to whoever asked that, just to kind of see if that resonates with them, if they think postmortems are like a paperwork problem. Because that's, I think, when Heather talks about that and Jason talk about retrospectives, they're not talking about filling out the paperwork so we can all be done and go home. You know, it really is about being a learning organization and how you feed that back in. And like I said, that to quote one of my favorite movies, you know, that shit sells itself, right? So I don't have to sell it, right? So That is also some kind of something to think about if you're having trouble sort of selling that to the business. It's not about the paperwork.
Got it. And we're coming down to about looks like 6 minutes. So we're just going to do one answer for the questions for the few remaining ones. The next question is for Jason on collateral damages of outages. Which impact of outages are the hardest to measure? And Jason, you're on mute.
It helps better with the microphone on. I think I would probably say that what I just previously mentioned about the brand impact. I think that's tough to measure, especially in a company who does not have either some sort of customer success arm where they're actually paying attention to what their customer sentiment is, and or a community management or some kind of community management type of team. Because quite honestly, that's what, people like me, our role, a big part of it is to understand sort of what do our customers think about us and what are their needs and what are they saying under certain circumstances. And the brand is a big part of a company, especially early on. I mean, some companies just flat out lose because they didn't pay attention to their brand and how important that is. And then when you have some sort of problem and you, again, like I mentioned previously, if you try to hide that, if you just aren't straightforward and open and, out on social media, you're updating your status pages and you're putting it out on Twitter, if you're not telling your end users what's going on and what you're doing about it on a very regular cadence, something pretty quickly, they, whether they choose to leave right away, their opinion on your service will change, and they'll talk to others. And there just seems to be this, this conversation that starts to happen that you not only can you have a hard time getting eyes on, but also measuring what that kind of impact is. So to me, maybe that's just because of the role I'm in. I feel like that's a really, really hard one to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. No, that's a great answer. And that's something we see, obviously, where we come in is protecting that end user experience and finding out if something actually failed internally, but it's not having an impact on the customers, is it as high of a priority as, that of external impact? So totally can relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, you can go and you can look at your infrastructure and your costs. If all of a sudden, sorry, you can go and you can measure some of the cost impacts and different things like that. But for me, the hardest ones are the squishy things, which are the people.
Yeah,
those are harder to measure than anything.
Excellent. The next one, real quick, is for J. Paul on SLAs. How often have you had to enforce an SLA with another party when they were identified as a source of the outage? And any tips for negotiating or enforcing SLAs?
I love SLAs because the answer when you're talking about SLAs is SLAs are what you put in place to manage broken relationships. And so the thing is, when you're talking about like negotiating or enforcing SLAs, I mean, there's a lot of great stories about when Hurricane Sandy hit New York, and it's like my data center is flooded. SLAs are like out the window, right? And if you look at most of these SLAs, they might give you some small financial refund or something like that, but that doesn't really help you manage your system. And so I would I would answer that in a couple ways. First, I would visit whoownsmyavailability.com. Go there right now if you want an answer on SLAs, because they'll tell you who owns your availability. That site will. But then the other thing I'd point people to, I did a presentation with actually a CTO of a hedge fund company called The Tyranny of the SLA. And we talk about like this idea that SLAs are sort of broken. And it's interesting, he works in finance. So we talked about, SLAs are kind of part and parcel of the way you do this stuff. But SLAs really are sort of trying to manage broken relationships, and there's sort of kind of better ways to do that. And really, even on the customer side, right? If you're a customer, you just want them to get the service back, right? So there are better ways to sort of answer those questions than being focused on the SLA. So that's what I would say is SLA, be very wary of SLAs, because when you talk about enforcing an SLA, I mean, again, if it's a hurricane, what are you going to do? Like, go down and help them bail out water? Like, in really bad situations where the SLA is really bad, there's not much you can do. And so yeah, check out whoownsmyavailability.com.
I think there's a lot of people who had a pretty serious wake-up call a few weeks ago with the DDoS attack on Dyn. Yep. Yep. And it really, I hope, and I know I put out a tweet out there just to get people thinking about it. I hope people realize that you know, 5 nines of availability is not only very tough, but sometimes it's out of your control. And you know, Paul said that site, you should go check it out for sure. But you do realize that although you, at the end of the day, may be responsible for your availability, there are parts of the network, parts of the internet that your service relies on. If I try to get into, you know, say Twitter, and I can't get to Twitter, is it because Twitter's down? Is it because they're in Amazon and Amazon East is down? Is it because of my own ISP? Is it because of my Wi-Fi here at the house? There's just a lot of moving parts. And in order to hold people responsible for this 5 nines availability or any kind of SLA, it doesn't matter how it's shaped, there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of complexity in there, and it's going to be really hard to actually pin your finger on what went wrong and who's responsible for it, which is, again, another case why we kind of want to steer away from root cause analysis and that kind of thing. High availability is hard, and it's hard to pin down too.
Let me tell you one really, I know we're right at the end, really funny, quick story. In that presentation that I was talking about, the tyranny of the SLA, we actually found an SLA that said we have 100% uptime. So we called their support people and we said, really, is it really 100%? And they said, let me get back to you. And a couple of days later, they came back and they said, we checked with our lawyers and we shouldn't be saying that, so we're not saying it anymore. And this is just kind of the shell game that happens with SLAs. So again, when you're down to talking about SLAs, you're already past the conversation you really should be having, not only internally, but with your vendors, because you're already in kind of a bad place where people are kind of playing shell games anyway.
Excellent. Heather, any last thoughts before we close up the session?
I love this session.
Perfect. Well,
we're going to do a retrospective right after.
Yeah, we will. We'll see. So you know, once again, thank you everyone for joining the discussion today. We had so many fantastic questions, and part of our retrospective is how do we get through all of them, right? So we didn't get through all of them, but there'll be some follow-ups coming on. Look for the Catchpoint blog. It should have an update there. Really special thanks to O'Reilly Media for co-sponsoring this event and helping to bring together this amazing panel. Huge thanks to Jason, Heather, J. Paul for sharing their time and expertise with us. Really, we wouldn't be able to do this session without you. No one wants to look at me the entire time. So guys, thank you so much. From the Catchpoint side, Peter Salidas and Sarah just did an outstanding job in helping coordinate. As mentioned before, we'll be sending out the recording and transcript shortly, as well as other resources from the panelists. Look out for that email. Hope you enjoy the Ask Me Anything. Stay tuned for our next one and have a great rest of the day. Bye, everyone.